Hello and welcome to As It Comes, Life from a Musician's Point of View. I'm Davina, I'm a freelance cellist based in London, and I, like many people in the Northern Hemisphere, have been suffering in this crazy-as heatwave. It's just been so hot. London reached 37 degrees last week, that's 98.6 Fahrenheit for Americans. I mean, I think if the outside temperature is the same, if not higher, than your internal body temperature, then surely it's a sign you should just stay home and do nothing. But that's not realistic for the means of earning a living. I've had rehearsals this week at a studio that's accessible only by going on the Central Line tube. For non-Londoners, the Central Line is the red line on the tube map. Red signifying the fact that it's the tube line closest to the depths of hell. So as a result is very stuffy and hot. It's super awkward travelling to a 7 p.m. rehearsal in rush hour with a cello on your back, just as everyone else is packing into the carriage like sardines, travelling to go home. You turn up to rehearsal gasping for breath, dripping in sweat, and downing as much water as you can get your hands on. But what's also been challenging has been dealing with the constant change of temperatures. 2 days later, I went up to Glasgow, where the temperature was half that of London. It was pissing down with rain, but about 93% humidity. On tours where you have to anticipate extreme changes of weather, you end up packing such a weird assortment of clothes. You know, those that help you endure the outdoors, such as rain jackets and boots, but then also your glam concert blacks for the air-conditioned concert venue. The struggle is real not only for humans and their clothing choices, but for instruments. Tuning becomes dodgy, strings unravel, you run the risk of getting split seams. Environmental factors play a lot in wreaking havoc on keeping your instrument in working order. I don't know about you, but I don't remember weather being this extreme when I was a kid. Is this all the accelerating effects of climate change? I mean, I'm only 32, so in a geological sense, I'm very, very young. But if I've noticed such sped up effects in my lifetime, then that's a bit worrying. But perhaps that's a topic for another episode in the future. How do you deal with the heat in the meantime? I'd be interested to know how you cope. For me, it's lots of coconut water and avoiding people if I can help it. So I've basically just started off this episode chatting about the weather. How mundane. My guest today is anything but. It's with Kate Simko. She's a DJ, film composer, and founder of London Electronic Orchestra. Before you hear our chat, I have a small disclaimer. I recorded this conversation over a year ago in July 2018. I intended to release this interview on another podcast that you might remember me from called Musicians Weekend, but I never got round to releasing it. Now that As It Comes is here, I'm really pleased that I get to share it with you, finally. I found it really interesting to hear how Kate got into the world of DJing. She's played in some of the biggest clubs in the world, and how that path led her to film composition and ultimately to London, where she founded London Electronic Orchestra. Despite this chat being over a year old, I still think it's relevant to listen to today, and I listened back on it just to make sure there weren't any outdated references. The interview format is a little different from this podcast. For example, there's no wildcard question round. I will say, also, at the end, she mentions her upcoming concert at the Barbican with Jamie Jones, and that has indeed passed in November 2018. It was a raging success, and they sold out the Barbican. Since then, she and Elio have gone on to play at the main stage of the Royal Albert Hall, supporting Carl Craig and Chineke Orchestra in April 2019. She's at the centre of this fusion that's going on right now of dance and electronic music with orchestra music, so I'm sure there are many exciting things coming up. Oh, I'll also say that a year ago my podcasting recording setup was pretty crappy then compared to now. In the past year, I've learned how to record interviews a bit better, so I apologise for the slightly hissy sound quality. This was also recorded in the residence bar in the apartment block she was living in at the time, so you might hear a bit of background noise. Points for every time you hear a seagull, a siren, a door beep, the rattling of ice in glasses, car horns. I mean, it's just the soundtrack of London, right? Anyhow, she has a fascinating musical path, which I hope you find informative. Have a listen to Kate Simko. Thank you so much for having me on the 24th floor of your apartment block with this beautiful view. It's really lovely.
No problem.
So you started studying in Chicago, and how did your path lead you to where you are today as a DJ, founder of London Electronic Orchestra, and a film composer?
Well, yeah, I started DJing in Chicago on the radio. So I had an interest in two things at that time. One was I was studying music technology, which was composing for electronics, essentially. So I learned how to use Pro Tools, and I learned about vintage synthesizers, and I was taking composition and studying piano. So that was, just pure piano, ear training, theory, very conservative music college.
Classical.
Very classical.
Education.
Yeah, classical education, and just a very conservative program. It was at Northwestern in Chicago. Yeah. And so I was doing that as my studies, and then on the side I was at the radio station and I was DJing for fun, and so that's how I got into the other side, like, I guess, not non-classical and performing. I didn't realize I was performing at the time, but that's how I got into it.
So when you say DJing, do you mean you're presenting shows, but as well as that, creating your own music as well?
Well, I was learning to create my own music.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that I would, by any means, want to play it for anyone. At that time was more, just the beginning days of experimentation. But yeah, so I was, a radio DJ. So like you said, a presenter. I have cassette tapes and CD recordings from back then. But also after presenting on the radio, I started getting requests to DJ at bars. And I would say, no, I'm not a DJ. I just play music on the radio. And then people would say, no, I mean, we've heard you DJ. We're happy, And I remember my first gigs, I was getting $80. And I was like, that was all you needed to, win me over. Yeah, exactly. Like 3 drink tickets and $80. And I was yours for like 4 hours, And so, yeah, that's how I got into DJing. And when I graduated from Northwestern, and I had anticipated having my career go in a different direction. I guess I envisioned myself making music for film and for television and that sort of thing for money. However, it was the hobby side of music that ended up being my career, really, for the decade after.
So you kind of fell into it by accident.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm noticing this sort of trend a lot with our previous guests and interviewees, is that they never quite intend to do something, but they just kind of ride this wave, and then all of a sudden they find themselves here. Yeah. So how did you find yourself in London for a start?
Right. So so what happened was, in Chicago, I was riding the wave exactly like you said, just sort of seeing what was happening naturally. I lived in Los Angeles for a year. I was interning and starting to make music for film, and I just realized then I did not want to make music for someone else. I just wanted to find my own musical voice, and I wanted to do my own thing. So I left LA and came back to Chicago and just really focused on finding myself, I guess, as a producer, finding my own sound, getting better at production, spending time DJing, and just having a day job that I was cutting the hours less and less and less and less till I finally could support myself. With music.
Yeah, make it your side hustle for a while, and then it becomes your main sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So just pulling that back slowly. And so I did that, and I was in Chicago and ended up touring the world, doing a live set of my own electronic music, releasing music on a number of labels, including Ghostly, Spectral Sound, which was, at the time, I would say, one of the very top underground electronic labels in the States. So they're out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, and they released Matthew Deere and a bunch of different people. But in like the mid 2000s to like late 2000s, that was like a real top label. So if you went to a festival or something in the States, their stage, their after party was, people wanted to be there. And so I was releasing with them, was touring around, doing my thing. And then I did a couple film scores, and I realized on a film score I did in 2008 that I just realized my limitations as a composer.
Okay.
So they wanted me to compose in a sort of style of Philip Glass, or maybe I decided I wanted to. To be honest, I don't remember how that worked, but either way, I was making sort of arpeggiated, ideas on the flute or whatever, but I was just using a keyboard, and I didn't understand the range of the instruments.
Sure. So you needed some background knowledge on orchestration and
a lot of knowledge.
Instrumentation.
Yes, I needed a lot of information to really understand what was going on, and I realized that, and I was excited to learn. But it was one of those things where I went from using something like a string pad to wanting to know what's the best way and refresh myself, because I really always was a music theory geek. But I wanted to refresh myself when writing my own music, with orchestration and voice lading, to how would I write for strings best, and how would that work if I wanted to add winds and brass at the same time. So anyway, I decided I needed to go back and get a master's, because this was not something I was going to self-teach myself for the next film score. There was just way too much going on.
Someone help me.
Yeah, basically. And, and in a really good way, though. I was excited to learn. And, I wanted to hear these instruments in person. And that's one thing that I realized, that as much as I love music theory, and I had excelled, I really did excel in interpreting music, in terms of like looking at a piece of music and being able to dissect which key it's in and what's happening. It's a lot different than you sitting down, with a cup of coffee and a blank slate and doing it yourself.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And so, and also it's really easy to listen to a piece of music and be like, oh, I love the brass in that piece. And sitting down and writing a piece of music where the brass sound good in that piece, right?
Sure, yeah.
So long-winded answer, but, to kind of shed light on how I moved to London and why I moved to London, it was genuinely because I wanted to spend time with the orchestra in person and not rush it, and spend a couple of years alongside these instruments, working with players, and finding my musical voice with the orchestra as well.
Yeah. So I guess that led you to study at Royal College of Music and do your film composition masters.
Yeah, exactly.
And happily ever after. Well, here we are, I guess.
And here we are, Davina. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so, to sum it up, well, you met several of the LEO players at college.
Yes.
Worked with them in the formation of London Electronic Orchestra. So, having formed LEO, did you feel like there was a demand to combine genres, your electronic genre with your classical composition? And what did you find from your DJ playing that really informed your classical performance and composition, and vice versa?
Well, I would say, first of all, it was really just riding the wave, if you will, at the Royal College of Music that led me to form what was later called London Electronic Orchestra. Because when I moved to London, although London at the time, so this was 2012, in 2012 I would say London was arguably neck and neck with Berlin as like the top city for electronic music in the kind of music I do, house and techno, as a DJ. So it was definitely, there was a part of me that was like, oh man, I need to, keep my head down. During my first year, I said no to some really key clubs that never asked again. There's the sort of places that ask once, but my point is, I moved here to study classical music,
sure.
and I was dedicated to that, and I was not, and I knew that I had so much to learn in 2 years, and I was committed to that, right? And so no hard feelings, it is what it is. So anyway, at the Royal College of Music, I had no intention of being allowed, quote unquote. I wasn't sure what they would even think of electronics, and if that's something that, especially dance. I mean, beats and stuff.
Yeah.
I would think that, of course I want sound design, it's film music, but in terms of taking my DJ background and putting it next to next to orchestra, I did not expect them to get behind that. And I was okay with that. I was like, these could be two separate worlds. I'll focus on just the orchestra, and if they get combined later, so be it.
Yeah.
But I didn't even know how I would do that, if that would sound cheesy or good or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah, my composition professor was the one who encouraged me. As I was, like I said, trying to find my voice as a composer, he was like, listen, a lot of composers who study with me, come in here and they haven't found a voice at all as a composer. He's like, you're already a composer. You already have a musical voice. So why would you start from zero? Yeah. Take your sound and just add the palette of the orchestra, combine that with your sound.
That's how music evolves, I suppose, isn't it? It's not just from starting from a fresh slate all the time. Like,
yeah, exactly. So he's like, find your signature. Don't throw away what you've already built, essentially, like when you're trying to create an identity as a film composer.
Yeah.
Don't discount what you have already. Because of my composition professor suggesting that I ended up, working with new tracks that would have beats, and I'd go in and I started working with Valeria Kurbatova, our harpist, and getting her to record some rhythmic harp parts over more dance beats and putting strings over, so I would have remixes, that were helping, get a little income in while I was a student and stuff like that. And I'd just be in the recording studio, which was £20 an hour, as much as I could. They knew that I was like, I would always sign up for as much as I possibly could. Yeah. And they knew that if there was ever a cancellation, like, just call me. Like,
Kate's just around the corner.
Yeah, don't worry. Like, it's never too late to call me.
Yeah,
I'll take that hour for £20 anytime, because it's just unbelievable, and now that I'm out in the real world, I mean, wow.
You don't have that anymore, and just to have that contact time is so valuable, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just with players on tap. Exactly. And a space to access really, really easily.
Totally. And, exactly, just players where you can just say, okay, for the album, for example, just bring down a vibraphone. You know what I mean? Let's just bring down a vibraphone.
Oh, try hiring a vibraphone now. There's so many fees involved.
Right, exactly.
Porterage and hireage and all these other things.
Yeah, exactly. So it was all great, Yeah. All very easy. There was no porterage. There was no problem.
Breezy times at the RCM.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I just, anyway, it's just like you said. It was just what happened naturally. Yeah. It was, what other, musicians are telling you. It's the same with me. And I think in music, the advice I had when I was around 20 with my jazz piano teacher was, have a lot of different things going on in music at the same time, was his advice. Don't just have one tiny little niche. Be involved in different things. So just for example, you have a lot of different projects,
Sure,
outside this podcast, you have many things going on. A lot, play with orchestras, you play with, different ensembles, you're a soloist, you do a lot of different things. And so I've, always approached music like that as well. And, because then when one thing is going great and there's a lot of momentum, you can ride that wave, and also you're not pigeonholed.
Exactly, you're not boxed in, because you never know what's coming around the corner. I had a really interesting conversation with my sister once, and she's always had quite steady office job type thing, but then there was one time when she said, Davina, I'm actually a little bit envious of your freelance lifestyle. And I was like, what? Freelancers always envy the steady income types. And she said, well, because let's say you lost one form of income, you've got so many contacts, so many strands of income coming in from other places that you'd probably be fine. If I lost my job, I lose everything. And I was like, oh, I never really thought of it that way.
Yeah.
So I think we are really lucky to be able to have that variety that music does create.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so too. And I think it takes pressure off as well, because if you have that variety, then also you're not pushing yourself. If you only do one thing and you're just like, whatever it is, if you're known for one sort of thing and, that's all you do, and you've done one album of that one thing, and then you have a lot of pressure to have the next one be just as good or better, and it's like, if you're... So anyway, that's how it ended up happening. I met these players at Royal College of Music. I was in the recording studio quite a bit, and then at the end of the year, they have a week that is called Great Exhibitionists, where they rent out the student theater, the opera theater, which is beautiful, called the Britain Theater. And one student a year, at least when I was there, gets the theater. You have to make a proposal. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm getting that theater. Because that was my second year. Because the first year I went to the other students who had their show at the theater. And I was like, this is amazing, And I was like, I didn't know at the time. I'm like, this is like going to be my last hurrah. It's going to be the end of my second year studying in London. My Tier 4 student visa was going to be expiring. And I was like, this will be my chance to like put together my sort of vision and what I've done and, working really hard for 2 years and, that'll be my chance. And, 20 pounds an hour is great at the recording studio, but talk about having a free orchestra and, all the, the mics and the sound techs, and it was recorded on video, and it was just amazing, like the entire staff of the theater. I mean, the whole thing was just there. Yeah. And so that was my platform. And again, it was just, I just wanted to do it, for...
Well, why not?
Why not?
When are you going to get this opportunity again? It's going to be so much harder, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I sort of invited everyone I knew from the electronic side. It completely sold out. It sold out. Excellent. They said it was the earliest sellout they've ever had of a student show in there. Oh. It's only like a 300 capacity, but, everyone from the electronic side, wanted to go to a free concert with orchestra.
Let's check this out.
Let's check it out. Exactly. So that was March 2014. And leading up to the show, I was just like, what am I going to call it? And I was speaking with a friend and working with a friend about starting a label, which I now have started, called London Electronic Recordings. Mm-hmm. So I just ended up calling it London Electronic Orchestra. Mm-hmm. And the name stuck.
Yeah. Here we are. LEO.
LEO. And so, the last thing to say is that at that show, there was a manager from a management company, and about a week after the show, I was contacted, and they took me on board, and that's how LEO was taken from the student world into the real world. Yeah. And on the back of LEO, I applied for an exceptional talent visa.
And that's how you're still with us today.
That's how I am here with you in London today.
Do you think you'd be able to do what you do here in London with LEO and your film composition anywhere else?
I'm from Chicago. I could not do this in Chicago.
No, the scene's not quite there.
No.
Right.
That was one of the reasons I left. Chicago has an amazing orchestra. The Chicago Symphony is phenomenal. I grew up with Daniel Barenboim as the main conductor and Pierre Boulez. I mean, they're phenomenal.
Yeah.
Also, though, when I would be at the concerts, it was just such a conservative program, which is fine. I mean, I was there with my grandmother. I didn't care.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, it's not like going to South Bank Center and seeing middle-aged and younger people there,
Seeing something really groundbreaking.
Yeah.
Something that pushes the barriers.
Yeah, very rarely, and not with the symphony itself, more with, maybe they'll have a night once in a while, but very, very rarely. And so, anyway, maybe in New York, New York has a good scene, and that could have been possible, but I do think that London, I know that Europe and the UK is farther along in its acceptance of electronic music. Mm-hmm. The US is getting there. So basically, in the UK and Europe, like when I would be in Berlin when I was on tour, I'd be mind blown that I'd hear house music, for example, at a boutique, in the city. Whereas in Chicago, it'd always be rock and roll. Right? And, and electronic music, house and techno is underground, genuinely. Like, you really didn't hear it on the radio and this and that. Whereas in London, BBC Radio 1 every night is like, it's a really mainstream, bigger thing. So, it's, when I was interviewing to study at NYU, which has a film scoring program, they said that my portfolio would have to consist of all new orchestral-only material, and that anything I'd done up to that point, including film scores or anything that was, even a mixture of electronic and classical, just didn't count. Anyhow, New York just wasn't the place for me to learn what I wanted to learn about orchestra. So I don't think that combining the orchestral side with electronics really could have happened many places. I mean, maybe in Berlin. I don't know what they have going on there exactly. But, I think London was the best suited place. London, has so many ensembles.
And there's an audience for all this stuff.
Exactly.
I'm very surprised at some of the concerts that I do. I'm not going to say exactly what, but I just see people in the audience and it's sold out, and I think, oh, you came to this concert. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
But it's good motivation as a performer to do your best.
Yeah.
Because you think someone's paid money to come see this.
Yeah.
You know, you've got that pressure, I suppose. So what attracts you to writing for film? I was actually listening to your playlist that you created on Spotify, inspiration for the film that you wrote the soundtrack for, called 20 Weeks. I can definitely tell there's like minimalist influences in there, lots of Max Richter and Steve Reich, Philip Glass.
Yeah.
Very, very enjoyable.
Yeah, so that film score was for a director in Los Angeles, and I worked on it remotely. And, just like a side note, personal comment, that was crazy. So I took on the score in 2016, and, films just take a long time to get to the final cut, and this, that, and the other. So, in 2016 I took it on, and then final cut, I think, was over to me just before Christmas or something like that. And then I ended up getting pregnant in January of last year. So I was scoring 20 Weeks, which is about a woman who has complications under 20-week scan. Honestly, like right between, like in the first trimester when it was too early to tell anyone I was pregnant, and just like, scoring music to these scenes. But I'm just saying, it really synchronized with my my life.
Yeah,
scoring that film.
So you enjoyed the process.
I love scoring for film, and when I did my undergrad, when I mentioned I studied music technology, they did not offer anything specifically in scoring for film, and I really wanted to learn Pro Tools. And so for my final independent study in my final year, I did a project where I mainly self-taught Pro Tools and score film, short film, from the film school at Northwestern, and submitted that. So that was just something I've always been interested in. I was always interested in how music and picture align, sort of like a modern opera, really, if you will. It's like music and acting and everything all together, isn't it?
Learning about leitmotifs and oh, there's a fancy word.
What I love about film scoring that the process is almost the opposite of starting from zero. So when I'm making a club track, I'll think about, when I'm at the club, what I like to hear, what makes me want to dance, what has a good energy, different elements, for example, and then I'll start from zero. But when there's a film, it's a lot about the character, if it's a narrative, or if it's a documentary about, what the underlying message is. And, sometimes your job as a film composer is to bring something in to the scene that may not have actually been there.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
To suggest something that's not necessarily on screen.
Yeah, exactly. So I really, really like that about it. And it takes me a little bit of time usually to get inside a film, but I enjoy that process. Just really to consider what the palette's going to be musically, in terms of the instrumentation, and what's the sort of sonic world. But then also to get inside the characters and, see what's quirky about it.
Yeah.
And, what are a couple things you can sort of bring out. And, I really like it.
Just have that, I suppose you have your parameters, don't you? And then just being able to be so creative within that.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple questions that we ask every guest on our podcast.
Okay.
So each episode we have a segment about weird gigs.
Okay.
And I was wondering if you have a weird gig that you would like to share with us.
I've had a lot of weird gigs with Davina.
We've definitely had some weird costumes in LEO.
Yeah, we've had some funny costumes with LEO. Some of the weirdest gigs for me are always where I'm booked and people don't know I'm performing.
Oh no. Why is that?
And it happens mainly in countries, and to be honest, a lot happens in the United States, like smaller cities where they don't have the right sort of venues, back when I was playing electronic music. So I remember one time in Seattle, I was playing and they had my live set. So I wasn't DJing at all, and I was like behind the bar because that's where they had space for me with my laptop.
Yeah.
And I had people coming up to me and asking for drinks.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I'm saying that, like, from a very humble place, but, I mean, that's weird in, like, a frustrating way. But it's like, it's weird culturally as well. You know, it's just weird how people don't tune into it. Like, I never was angry with anyone. It's just weird that, you know, somebody's gone to a bar in a city where, again, I said electronic music was not mainstream. And there's, you know, my music, you know, especially back then, didn't have lots of vocals or anything. So it's definitely like an odd sort of techno. It's really loud. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And people are dancing sort of in front of me. And somebody makes their way to the front. In front of the dancing people.
Yeah, and oh, by the way, can I have a...
Yeah, and things that maybe on my computer, I don't know, I'm like logging in, I guess, like drink orders.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and
but
then they'll just be shipped in on like some...
Yeah, and like, so yeah, I mean, it's just a weird... It's weird in the sense that people are oblivious.
Yeah.
Just really oblivious. It's like, you know,
Yeah.
they're also drunk probably.
All right, Kate. So, for our final question, so we ask all our guests this question. If you weren't a musician, what would you be?
You know what? I would be a human rights lawyer.
Wow. Good answer.
Which is different.
Yeah.
Than, you know, a lot different path. But yeah, my dad is an attorney, and I just grew up realizing how much you can help the world by understanding the laws. And so yeah, if I was not in music, which I hope is my own personal way to reach people and inspire people and to make them happy, and bring joy, you know, I hope, to some people's lives, you know, you know, but yeah, I mean, that would definitely be the thing I would want to do. Yeah, human rights lawyer.
You're a hard worker, as the RCM is saying, so I'm sure you'd be very good at that. Thank you so much for doing that. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what's coming up for yourself and for Elio and your film composition?
So yeah, upcoming, the big project that I'm working on is in November on the 27th. I'm doing a show with house producer and DJ Jamie Jones at the Barbican Center. So yeah, it'll be our largest, actually, London Electronic Orchestra ensemble since the Britain Theatre concert I mentioned in 2014. Yes. So I'm really excited for this, and I'm writing new music for full orchestra at the moment, and I'm working on a new feature-length film score, a documentary also from the US called We Believe in Dinosaurs. It's called that, but it's about the Creationists Museum in Kentucky.
Okay.
And then I'm making new music of my own, you know, just producing some new dance tracks and DJing, and yeah, that's what I'm doing.
As you mentioned before, you got to do a little bit of everything, don't you?
Yeah, I enjoy it like that as well.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Let you relieve the babysitter now. That was the multi-talented Kate Simko. Since that chat a year ago, she has just returned to the UK from a DJ tour of the United States in July 2019 and is back in the studio making new music for London Electronic Orchestra. And as mentioned at the very end of the chat, she'll be releasing the soundtrack album to the feature documentary We Believe in Dinosaurs this autumn. Oh, she didn't say autumn, she said fall, because she's American. Sorry, Kate, it took so long to release this conversation, and I really appreciate you hiring a babysitter for an hour to chat to me. Her child has since doubled in age. I'll put the links to the playlist and films mentioned in the conversation in the show notes so you can check out Kate's work from there. This week's Music College Didn't Prepare Me comes from oboist Amy Turner. Music College didn't prepare me for the time I was asked to dep on a show commemorating the group The Carpenters. So for non-musos, I'm just saying this because I have been asked before, dep is short for deputising or deputy, so if you're covering or substituting a regular player. I had the pad of music, which was fine, but I did notice that there were some lyrics penciled in as well. I then noticed there was a microphone in front of my stand. When I inquired, I was told, "Oh yeah, just feel free to join in on the backing vocals." So music college certainly didn't prepare me for having to mouth words to various songs by the Carpenters, my jaw moving up and down like a ventriloquist's puppet, oboe in my hand. Thank you, Amy, for your contribution. I've definitely been in a similar boat. Every time I'm in a situation where I have to sing the national anthem in a country I'm not from. It only happened to me once in Australia. I don't even remember where I was, but we all stood up and then everyone launched into the national anthem. And I know the melody because the tune is actually brilliant. I think it's really catchy. But I didn't know any of the words. So I just stood there kind of like moving my mouth going blah, 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 blah. I don't know any of the words to this da-na-na, girt by sea. That's the only thing I know, is that the Australian national anthem features the word girt. It's not really a word that anyone uses. I think it's an adjective. It means surrounded by sea, which makes sense. I will admit, I still don't know the words to the UK national anthem, and that's meant to be an easy one. So I should learn sometime, one day. If you have an experience that music college didn't prepare you for, then let me know. Email me at asitcomespodcast@gmail.com, or just find me and tell me. I'm around. One more thing before I wrap up. I have a bit of a personal plug to mention. I've recently become a speech contributor for BBC Radio 3, the classical music and culture radio station here in the UK. I've been writing and recording some short voice segments about musical locations in Britain for the Time Travellers series. It's on during the weekday morning show Essential Classics, and they broadcast a segment every day from a different contributor at 10 past 10. That was not a good time to say in a Kiwi accent. I really wanted to say 10 past 10 or 10:10. That's a cartoon character. 10 past 10 on a weekday. Now you won't forget what time it is. So listen out for my stories. By the time this episode goes out, I would have had a couple come out, but you can find them online or find it on the BBC Sounds app. I've written a story about New Zealand composer Douglas Lilburn, who sent loads of pots of honey to his teacher, Vaughan Williams, as you do. Also a story about the composer Rebecca Clark, who wrote a very famous viola sonata. So I'll try and put a link to those in the show notes, and there'll be more coming out in the future. So I better get writing and researching. Anyway, plug over. Thanks for indulging me. I'm just going to say I'm very excited. And it's pretty cool to be doing something a bit different from playing the cello. I'm a time traveller for the BBC. I'm Doctor Who, basically, is what I'm saying. No, just kidding. I wish. That's it for today. Special thanks to Roz Nagy for my logo and Daniel Elms for my jingle. Massive belated thanks to Kate Simko for sitting down to chat with me 13 months ago. And finally, thank you for listening. It's always great to hear what you think of the pod, so get in touch at asitcomespodcast@gmail.com. Like and follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at asitcomespod. Remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, and spread the word. Chat to you all soon. Bye. Remember to rate and review the apples at rate and review. This pink lady is exceptional. It's very crisp and crunchy. 5 stars. Remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.